So my name's Charlotte and I work for an organisation called Lookout, and we work to connect young people with artists so that they can explore creativity, and we run things like workshops, talks, mentoring, and we're very happy to be here partnered with GB Met today to bring this talk to you from Tarik. So I would like to start by welcoming you, Tarik. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
That's all right. Nice to have you. Could you just start off by letting us know a bit about your job, what you do, and how you would describe your role that you do?
My title for Marlborough Productions is creative director. So within that, that kind of is about creatively directing the organization. That can be in terms of kind of like coming up with a theme for a program or a general direction that the organization might be following for a few years. And also within that, there's also the kind of things like people management and various bits of admin, and sometimes doing talks, and also working on the various other creative projects that I lead on. So I have a couple of projects that I'm currently leading within Marlborough Productions, which is an organization or a charity now that I am co-founder of. We founded it in 2010, I believe, maybe 2009. So within that organization, I currently lead a project called Radical Rhizomes, in which I would say it's kind of like a community organizing via creative engagements.
Right.
And that's specifically for LGBTQ people of color. And then I also have my own project and creative project that I lead called Brownton Abbey, which is an Afro-Futuristic space church themed performance party that centers,
Right.
celebrates, and elevates disabled queer people of color.
And is that in Brighton, or do you tour? Is that kind of touring, or?
It's a touring project.
Mhm.
We first launched in Brighton Festival in I think 2018. I'm not great with dates. I've got ADHD. Time is kind of like an
That's
anathema
okay.
for me. But let's say it was around 2018,
Yeah.
and we had a tour lined up for 2020, but of course that got cancelled. And
Okay.
since then, we've been figuring out how to turn Brownton Abbey into a digital project, which we've got our kind of a debut of that happening in on June the 18th.
That's exciting.
I can
So
tell you more
did
about that later.
Yeah, please do. So when you talk about Marlborough Productions, did Marlborough Productions come from the venue, the Marlborough, or was it Marlborough? Do you want to say a little bit about the venue, because people might not know necessarily about the
Yeah.
venue as well?
So Marlborough, there's a venue in Brighton called Marlborough Pub and Theatre. I started working there when I started university in 2001. I came to Brighton from London to study psychology at Sussex University, and I got a job in the pub underneath the theatre, and I worked in the pub for about 7 or 8 years before I decided that I would take over the theatre upstairs. And that happened, that was kind of like me just being an opportunist, really. As in, like, I mean, I wanted to do it. It wasn't just being an opportunist,
Yeah,
but I saw an
yeah.
opportunity and I took it.
Mm.
And I saw that I was able to see that opportunity because I was working in the pub. So I would kind of learn the habits of the building, the route, the kind of the comings and going of the place,
Mm.
and also the comings and goings of the management. So I had when in 2008, when the when the pub management was going to change hands, I realized that so would the theatre management, and then that was my window in which I would say, as someone who'd been working in that venue for a long time, whoever the new manager of the pub would be, that I would convince them that they would give me the theatre to look after, and that's how I became a director of a theatre company.
Wow.
Figuring out as I went along, basically, because I didn't come into it with any particular theatre background or anything. Hadn't studied theatre, But I love the building, I love the space, and I wanted to just make the space something that was available to the creative community of Brighton, and particularly people who were doing, I think, kind of alternative stuff that didn't fit in mainstream. So
Yeah.
I, up to that point, I'd been working a lot at festivals,
Okay.
and I was starting to bring kind of festival activity. I was bringing people to festivals to do some kind of creative things and at summer festivals, and then also was seeing that that kind of work would fit nicely in this small little theatre. Some of the kind of the sideshow stuff that I was seeing at festivals.
Yeah. So is that where the kind of producing element came in, through sort of going and looking for work actively?
Yeah, so that kind I guess that came from just having to make things happen, which I think for me is how I understand so much of what being a producer is just doing whatever's needed to make the thing that needs to happen.
Mm.
I was already producing before I knew what producing was, it turns out. I remember saying to my business partner one year,
Interesting.
meeting some producers and being like, I wish I was a producer. And my business partner saying, that's what we do, Tarik. And this is a kind of like a testament to me, not really just stuff of just not necessarily knowing what I was doing, but also just doing things anyway, just to make things happen. Like I didn't need to know what the job title was in order to do it. I was just figuring out what needed to happen and making it work, which meant that I had some interesting discoveries and doing things in my own way. But also, I learned later on had its own barriers, I guess.
Mm. But that's very interesting. I love that about how you say you were doing stuff without knowing what the job title was. That's a really interesting way of looking at careers and jobs, is that actually you might start doing things naturally that you don't know what that is, particularly in the creative industries, because things cross over so much, I guess. And then you're learning that, and then you're like, oh, I'm a producer. That's what I'm doing. I'm actually doing that work. So what about kind of mistakes and different pathways, and do you feel like you've kind of gone down a sort of alternative route, as it were, to get into the industry? Because you said about you studied psychology. Did that stop when you, or did you carry on with that? And
Yeah, well, I did psychology and then I finished. I studied that for 3 years and then I finished that. I didn't know when I was studying that one, I had hearing loss. I do wear hearing aids. I'm not wearing them right now because I've got these headphones on, but I normally wear hearing aids to
mm,
support my hearing. And I also have ADHD. I didn't know that I had either of those disabilities or conditions at the time. So I struggled with my psychology degree and I left and then kind of just didn't really think about it again in some way. I mean, I always find psychology interesting, but I didn't really think about the degree and academia for a long
mm,
time.
mm,
And just got a job in a bar and a juice bar and enjoy just being in a just having a nice time with my life. I wanted to just be happy. It's kind of like my main goal. No particular career idea, just like just be in a situation that I'm happy in. And then I also started to at some point, I think maybe 2006, maybe 2005, I decided to do an art foundation course.
okay.
So that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence to have creative pursuits, I guess, and to kind of um, to see myself as a creative person. Because I think even before that, I was scared of acknowledging that I was a creative person. I felt maybe it was arrogant or something to suggest that I might be creative.
That's really interesting. So you felt that doing a creative course, or getting some kind of creative qualification, would kind of help you in your own sort of understanding and being not accepted, that's the wrong word, but but going, oh yeah, I've done this creative course now, so I do know what I'm doing, and I do.
It was something to get me started. It gave me a few lessons on that. So, for example, I learned and that ones that I could apply to then um, being a producer or
Mm,
having a creative venture. So, for example, with the Art Foundation, there's a lot of it is kind of sort of mixed media. It's more visual arts. I would say it's not performing arts or anything.
no.
Um, so I was learning about some drawing techniques and um, I remember one thing that struck me was about like when you finish a project that it's not really ever over, I guess, or that it kind of this thing's kind of evolving from one thing to the next.
Mm,
And that was one thing that was interesting that I felt like I took with me is that there's a kind of continual flow of
the
creativity and that there's not
development.
necessarily a start and stop of things. Things
Yeah.
develop from, yeah, it's development exactly. and also about not throwing things away, I guess. There was something within when if you're doing creating something, if you're sketching something, not to throw your sketches away and to kind of to hold on to them as part of your work. And I remember just thinking that that was just that there were certain lessons that I could take with me and apply them to um, a sort of a physical, real world um, creative project. So I say this in that when I first took over the space of the Marlborough, and I had no idea about theatre, but I had a theatre space. So I did
Mm.
feel a bit like an imposter holding this space, but I also, I wanted to kind of approach it creatively. And I thought also about, so the way I imagined that the building and what I was going to be doing was that I would be utilizing the space as a kind of uh, live 3D collage type thing. So it was, and that the people and the artwork that came into that was where, and now I can see that as I guess curation really.
Mm.
That I was seeing how things fit, the kind of how things can fit together and make sense as a whole, and also in their parts.
That's a really good point that you highlight. Is you had a vision and you were willing to take a chance and to just get stuck in and work incredibly hard, I would imagine, to build it up into the like amazing reputation that it had. Was there any particular people or person that influenced you or helped you along that creative path, either when you were younger or when you kind of got to Brighton? Or
Well, I started I got into the Marlborough. I kind of like had the space. I was like, I'm going to figure out what to do. There were people who, at the time, I was into steampunk. It was cooler back then. Don't judge me on it now. But I was doing a lot of steampunk stuff. So the steampunk scene, people were really helpful. Just other creative people were helpful and encouraging. But then also, I gathered together some volunteers, and one of the volunteers was someone who I had met when I was just scouting, going to other venues actually to try and see if other venues might have a team of volunteers, and if any of those volunteers might want to come and join this new venture, so I could poach any volunteers basically. So I tried the basement venue, which no longer exists sadly. I tried the basement venue, and there was someone who was working there called David Shepherd. He came and joined me as a volunteer, and I quickly learned that he actually knew stuff about theatre. So the two of us, he was also a few years younger than me and a bit shyer, a little bit less sort of gung ho about things. And so we developed a partnership. Basically, I realized that he had skills that I didn't have, and I had things that I could do things that he couldn't do. And so we worked together, and we still are working together, co-directing. He's the executive director. I'm the creative director at Marlborough Productions. A good how many years later? 10, 11, 11 or so, maybe 12 years later.
yeah, amazing. So you built up that, so he was volunteering and you've just got that kind of relationship that works, have you? And you've got different skills and, like you said, different personalities, I guess, that also just work together.
Yeah, he was volunteering, and I guess maybe he might have seen it as a potential opportunity as well. He came and did some volunteering with me, and then he obviously, yeah, he had a lot to give, and I recognized that I could go further with him. I don't know, I felt
Yeah.
instinctively that I could trust him as well, and that I should share power with him, I guess. And that's, I think, have been a really good decision.
Yeah, yeah. Why not? I mean, that's the thing. The other thing about the arts is, collaboration is key, I guess. And it's all, the more you collaborate, I think even, it's becoming that way even more now because especially over the last year and what's happened, but working in isolation is extremely difficult. So, everyone's got different ideas and brilliant ideas they can bring to the table. So why not collaborate?
Yeah, collaboration has definitely been a key thing for me. And I actually, even as an artist, I think of myself as kind of always as a collaborator. Actually, I don't really ever see myself doing things. I don't like doing things on my own. Even though I'm kind of quite an independent person, there's something about I don't know. I guess when it comes to doing something creatively, even just ideas, I recognize that they don't just come. Like I might have a creative vision of something, but I also recognize that those have come about through conversations. I don't like to just create this idea that everything has just come divinely from me. things come to me through stimulus through other people.
And what about your, like, working with other artists and companies and, you know, other producers, and how did you start to approach that? How did you contact people? How did, you know, if there's anyone who wants to be an artist or think about being a producer, what are your kind of tips and advice about getting in touch with people and finding that work and, you know, that niche sort of show that you might want to be finding?
I mean, people who have shows want to put them on somewhere. So a lot of the time, it's just a case of contacting people and finding out what it is that they would need in order to come down and do the thing,
Mm.
and then seeing if you can make that happen. Sometimes that might mean collaborating with somebody else to get this, to get the space, or to get the money, or whatever it is that is needed. But a lot of the time, it's not as mystical as people might think. You know, there's been some amazing artists that I've just partly kind of blown away that I've been able to work with, but actually we just sent them an email and said, "Hey, we'd love to work with you. Would you be interested?" And some people said yes, and some people said no. Um, so so yeah, it's just a case of being, I think, confident to approach someone, to find out what someone would need, not to kind of expect that you have to have all the answers. You know, we don't have to have the answers to everything. We don't have to know something before we do it. There is a
Mm.
little bit of, I guess, I definitely have been someone who I can attest that I've learned things along the way. And if I had to know everything in advance, I wouldn't really have got anywhere, I guess. And I also think that has allowed me to do things a little bit different as well by approaching something and being willing to learn and adapt on the job and to make things work. Especially because I'm doing a lot of the time things that I'm more interested in, things that haven't been done before, or a little bit
Mm.
unusual, a little bit left field. And that also does require the kind of thinking that maybe is about doing things in a different way that hasn't been previously done. So going a bit off the beaten track, I think, can be an advantage.
Yeah, brilliant. We've just had a question in that I'm going to feed through because it's interesting, Tarik, because you can talk about the space now and not having
Mm.
a space. And but Vanessa's just asked, would love to bring a student's show to the Marlborough. What kind of work do you like to bring in? So do you want to say a bit about what kind of where you are at with the Marlborough and what's happening?
Yeah, so we made the decision to leave the building. About 2 years ago, we'd been thinking about it for a few years because it was a lot of work running a building, particularly one that you don't own and that you don't have a freeholders agreement for. So we were franchisees of the space, and so we were kind of responsible for it, uh, but also we didn't own it, and we couldn't make particular changes to the building, which also meant that we couldn't get particular funding to do things to make it more accessible, for example, for disability access. And
Mm.
because so much of our work is about making things accessible to marginalized communities, it became more and more apparent that it wasn't, that we were kind of had reached a bit of a glass ceiling, I guess, with that space. Although it had been amazingly beneficial for us to kind of grow in there, we kind of were also not able to grow. We're kind of put a bit of a limit on our growth as
Yeah.
well. Um, and also there was something kind of to do with the fact that people who own the building didn't invest back into us as into the community that gave them the profits. So people were profiting off marginalized LGBTQ creative people in that space, not even just creative people, just part of the community actually would just be in there. And that
Mm.
there's like some land owners making money out of us, but we're not able to profit back into our own community. It didn't feel right politically. So we made the decision to leave, and rescheduled that for March 2020. And then March 2020 came around, and there happened to be a pandemic that made us leaving the building kind of happen without people really noticing. There was less of a like, wait, what's happened?
Where
People,
have they
you know,
gone?
just
Yeah.
it's only now that people have started to. Well, I mean, we did also do an announcement about 6 months into the pandemic. We didn't It didn't make sense to announce it really at the time either. We felt that it would kind of disappear on people, so we announced it a few months later. Um, we were a little bit more settled. And it's only now also that some people are starting to, now that things are opening again, people are questioning what's happening with the space. I also don't know what's happening with the space. It was a hard decision to leave somewhere that I'd been in for 20 years, that I'd kind of
I bet.
gone from a young adult into an adult with no hair or with less hair. you know. So
So what would your yeah, so it's interesting. So that space is just there and not being used, is it?
I think it's being used for rehearsals for something in the Fringe at the moment. So it is still being used. I just don't have any
Okay.
responsibility over it. So in
So,
terms of the question about bringing a student show
yeah,
to,
I was
I
going to
guess.
say, any other venues or advice that you'd have for that?
I don't know actually. At the moment, I'm not sure what to advise on that actually. I know the Rialto exists. I'm not sure how they are for student size. I know they do a lot in the Fringe, so
Mm.
I think it's really the right sort of size venue for that kind of work. And the Marlborough Theatre might well open again for student shows. So I have no idea. I can't say for sure, but I think um, find some smaller, affordable spaces to try something out in. Latest might also be a venue that might be
Yeah.
latest. I think it's called Latest 7. I'm not sure what it's called. I think it's just called Latest, isn't it?
Native bar or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
But so, yeah, just get in touch with those kind of smaller fringy venues. Yeah, that's great. What would you say, Tarik, that you enjoy most about what you do? What gives you that buzz? What makes you,
Mm.
want to get up every day and go, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do something creative.
Um, Sometimes I don't feel that way, and I think it's fair to say that we don't always enjoy our jobs every single day of the year, and
Yeah.
even when it's a job that you love, and that I think it's good to have that kind of context because also just life happens. But I'm really, I love my job. I don't want to be doing anything else right now. I also don't know what else I would do currently. But what do I love about it? I mean, okay, so one of the things that I love about it is I can have a creative vision. Like I might just see something and then 6 months later it might exist and I might see something really unusual and weird and think I want this, I need this, and not just I need this, other people need this, let's see if we can make it happen. I think that's it's a really beautiful thing. It's something that I've also learned. You have to take the time to appreciate what's happening because so much of the time within the arts, I mean, particularly when you're producing, um, you're working on something in the future, and by the time you might be nervous about the thing that's coming up. By the time you get to that thing, there are another 5 or 6 other things that you can be worried about in the future. So you can, if you're not careful, spend your whole time worrying about about events in the future,
Yeah.
rather than also appreciating the success and the beauty of things that are happening in the now.
Mm.
And I think that's definitely something that happens to producers and people who work in arts management, is they can kind of lose track of the joy of what they're doing and the connection.
Yeah.
So I love being able to connect with artists and creative people. I love being able to connect with audiences who get to experience, either see themselves reflected or learn something new or see something change within themselves as a result of this moment of whatever they've experienced.
Mm.
I love the freedom, I guess, that can come along a lot with creativity. um you know I like that. I think in the creative world, you just have, particularly in the kind of alternative sort of area in that I'm in, it's I get to be me in all my unusualness, and I do enjoy that. I definitely struggled with being me in all my unusualness for a while, and felt like I had to hide some of that in the
Yeah.
organization even. Recognizing actually that the things that made me me, and some of the particularly parts of my marginalized identity, were not things that I should be hiding, but should be things that I should in fact be bringing out to the forefront and being really proud of, and actually recognizing how they've benefited the company. Um, and they'd maybe just need a bit of other space or extra care around or something like that.
Yeah.
So, for example, like the disabilities that I have, making room for those and acknowledging them has I think, made me a better worker, better at doing my job, because I'm not trying to either hide them or doing extra work to accommodate for them, or kind of overdoing work. I think sometimes there's a kind of guilt that I have ADHD, for example, or guilt that I have hearing loss, and then I might try and overcompensate, which can lead to burnout. And actually, just more recently, relaxing into that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess leading on from that, you talk about a lot about how you work with marginalized communities, and that's what you want to support and who you do support. have you faced any particular challenges along the way, in terms of, you know, accessibility or, you know, awareness, raising awareness, funding, money, you know, has there been any particular challenges that you feel have?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the past it used to be a little bit harder. I think when we were writing to Arts Council, I think there was less understanding about the importance of queer work, for example.
Mm,
Um, um, I think that's kind of changing now, but it did used to feel at first like we had to spend a lot of the character count in our applications explaining why, um, the validity of the work or the reason behind it. I think when actually it was perhaps, yeah, I think I'm just kind of like having to articulate why queer work, why marginalized work is important in the first place was a challenge in the past, but I think that's become much more understood now within the Arts Council, which is really great.
mm,
Um, but I think then also within that there was this, I think what we used to find is that when you put Arts Council applications in for at the level of the work that we were able to do, those might be the ones that would be the ones that didn't go through. And it only seems to be that when we said that we were going to do more than what is actually feasible, that's the ones when the Arts Council were like, okay, great, you can do it. So that's been a bit of a challenge because you end up that it's kind of almost like there's a, you know, like this industry might lead you towards burnout,
mm,
because you have to do more than you're really able to. So I
mm,
think being realistic about what you're able to do is quite important, I think. And if you end up having to doing less than you were able to in your Arts Council application, I think that's also important just to be able to feed back rather than trying to do that
yeah,
stuff,
just to
actually to
say
feed that
why.
back to the Arts Council as to why it didn't happen.
Because I guess that's, you know, that's a thing that a lot of people see within the creative industries, that it is, you know, you can do long hours, you can push yourself, you do a lot more work, but I guess the rewards are good. But actually, are things getting better in terms of pay and money and funding, do you think? Is it getting? No, Mike's like, no, no. I mean, I know the answer, but I'm just, you know, I'm putting it out there. Is it? You know, you can make a living from being, you know, I think that's the thing, you know, you can make a living from being a creative. I guess it's the funding side that's always the challenge, isn't it? And
Yeah, I think it might take a little while to penetrate into it. I don't think it happens quickly, and I don't necessarily feel like necessarily would say it happens for everybody. Um, I think some people have been really burnt out by various funding streams.
yeah,
Um, um, but it is, I mean, it is definitely is possible. I know lots of artists and people who have managed to make a great career. They might not be driving around in expensive cars and things, but I don't think they're necessarily
that's not what
expecting to either.
I
Um, it might be nice. I also don't know if they're homeowners, for example. You know, I don't know what kind of like that. There's only more recently that I'm actually even beginning to be able to think like, oh, is that those things that I should be thinking about? Do I need to be thinking about um,
I
savings
mean,
and that kind of
you know,
stuff?
that's the thing in this country, we're very driven, aren't we, by having to own a house and, you know, things like that. But, you know, do you need to? You know, I don't know. It's,
Homeowners always seem to complain about it anyway, don't they? They're always
yeah,
moaning about owning a home.
exactly. Mike's just asked a question saying, what percentage of the productions are Arts Council funded?
Hmm. Well, sometimes up to 90%. They do require 10% match funding. So actually, a lot of the time we have just done that. We've managed to say we had a £60,000 Arts Council project. So there might be £6,000 might come from somewhere else, and then 54 maybe we'll get from the Arts Council. Um, and I so Yeah, actually, quite a lot we get from the Arts Council, and more recently, we've been actually leaning into more of making sure that we get the access costs that are needed to do that. So if there's people that you're working with that have got disabilities, if anybody on your team or audience members or anybody, there's costs that you can get additionally that are separate to the limits of what the Arts Council offers. And it's actually a really good idea to use those. That includes if you have like any sort of neurodiversity, and that they use a social model for disabilities.
Okay.
So that means that you don't have to have a diagnosis. So, for example, I have got a diagnosis for ADHD, but if I hadn't done, or before I did, it was, I think I might have, before I had the diagnosis, so I was aware that I had ADHD because of the symptoms and the behavior was something that I was just aware of. I
Mm.
was able to get support from the Arts Council, so I could get £500 to pay someone to write an application with me, which
Right.
in the
Wow.
past that wasn't how things were done. So it wasn't, I think, as easy. People would maybe somebody was writing an application. If a producer was writing an application with an artist, they might hide their fee in the application and kind of take it out of it if it was successful. But if it's not successful, they don't get paid.
But they get paid either way for that.
It's where you get paid either way. So it's really good, I think, to know about what kind of access, and it's not just Arts Council that has access support as well. That seems to be coming more and more across the board. So it's good to keep an eye out for, and to ask as well what access support
Yeah.
is available, depending on whatever you're doing. If you need it, it's always good to ask.
That's great. Yeah. Just ask. You never know. That's a great tip. Vanessa's just asked as well, going back to the venue, are you looking for a new base or building, or are you kind of exploring new avenues now and not running a venue?
We're enjoying having a moment without a venue, but we would love to have a space again. It would, I think, particularly because of the work that we do. As a queer, black mixed, disabled person, I really recognize the need to have spaces for marginalized communities, and particularly intersectionally marginalized communities. So people who have got more than one marginalization. And to actually kind of have some control over a space within the Marlborough, we're able to make it a safer space by making sure that the bar staff, for example, were trained to know that if somebody was transphobic in that space, that was something that we could ask someone to leave for. They'd be welcome to come back once they've done some learning. Like, we would never say that you've done something wrong, you're never welcome back. People can always learn. We're all in a journey. But stuff like around transphobia, homophobia, sexism, none of that stuff was actually welcome in our venue. And I think a lot of the time people don't think, a lot of venues don't really have those things to make somewhere safe. People will be like, oh, I didn't see it, so
let's just not
and then actually the marginalized people who are getting harassed or whatever in a space are not going to feel that comfortable. So yeah, we would love to have a space that we can be those political lefty queers that are like, care matters, care for people matters. And
but that's it. Also, it's demystifying these spaces. It's for everyone. People should feel comfortable and safe to go into a venue and enjoy something within live theatre. So absolutely,
and you shouldn't have to accept harassment and feeling like being made to feel shit. No, excuse my language. Just because you're a marginalized person. One thing that, for example, the Brownton Abbey project has demonstrated to me is that which is the Afro-Futuristic Space Church themed performance party that centers, celebrates, and elevates disabled queer people of color. That when we put that on,
brilliantly sold.
when we put that event on, we're not the majority in the audience of people there. But I never notice that I'm in a minority when I do Brownton Abbey. I always feel really empowered because of the work that we do to empower marginalized people. I just don't notice that I'm a minority until I kind of go home and look for my pictures and I'm like, I totally forgot. And that's a nice reminder that it's just a majority that can feel empowered, as minorities have the right to feel empowered and to feel that they can exist and have a nice, safe life. Or at least as nice and safe as people who are not marginalized because of their identities.
So can you tell us a bit more about Brownton Abbey?
I would love to. What would you like to know?
Well, what's
everything?
Everything. What's the concept? How it works?
So it's a performance party. It's a way of staging and holding performance arts in a way that isn't kind of, I personally find when I go and see, I've seen like live art and performance art, which are kind of art forms I wasn't familiar with until a few years ago, but would find going to festivals of live art and performance art to be a little bit cliquey or academic or something that made me just feel like I'm not sure if I don't know if I get it, and I also wasn't sure if I just always felt like welcome. A lot of the time I was the only brown person in the room or one of a few, and so I guess I wanted to bring some of that, but I also love the art form and the freedom of what live art and performance art can bring. And so, and I also was recognizing that I was seeing live art and performance art when I was at festivals, but and audiences were experiencing it, but it was a much more diverse audience that would experience weird stuff happening on a stage or
Mm.
in a funny little space. Um, and they had the freedom to get up and leave or to engage with it or to shout how what they were experiencing, which I think doesn't happen in a gallery space. When you see
No.
art in a gallery space, live art, you kind of tend to, not everybody, I guess maybe people who are not marginalized feel more freedom to be in their bodies and to get out if they don't like it. I know that I've been to see artworks and then just kind of felt already too exposed and obvious, or like, I'm already a spectacle myself, maybe, that I feel if I get up and leave the room that people are going to be like, oh, why did he leave? Was it because there was something racist just happened? Or so I kind of felt like my body was too politicized to have the freedom in that space. So putting live art and performance art into a club environment is a way of bringing this kind of rarefied art form into a space that gives more autonomy and freedom in the body, I guess, and it gives us more of an opportunity to respond to it how we like. If we can shout out and scream if how we're feeling about something and not feel.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
okay. Just feel
yeah.
like that's allowed. You're allowed to do that.
So Brownton Abbey, it uses Afro-Futurism as a way of and this idea of it being a space church is this idea of creating a space in which queer, black and brown people, especially disabled queer, black and brown people, um, who are told that we've got too many kinds of marginalized identities to find community. Because I was told, and it was at some point I was feeling really within my Marlborough career, feeling quite depressed and really feeling like an imposter. And I was meant to be producing a piece of theatre as part of some work, some funding that we'd got, and just felt like I don't think I'm a theatre producer. Like I've produced events and cabarets and this and that, but I don't think I produce theatre. I don't think that's my interest, but I felt like I kind of had to. And then I had a bit of a breakdown and realized that I just didn't want to do that. This thing that was supposed to be an opportunity, and actually, what I wanted to create was a space where I could get some healing, not just me, but people like me as well, who were in the arts but were also on the edge of something. So it was this idea of creating a space in which difference would be celebrated and elevated. So rather than difference being something on the outside, what happens when you put difference in the middle,
Mm.
and what does that do to an environment?
Mm.
So that's kind of one of the principles that Brownton Abbey works on. It always we make sure that the space that we're in is opulent, is a big part of it. When they've tried to give us basements or attic spaces, I'm kind of adamant that marginalized people have historically turned basements into heavenly spaces.
Mm.
We don't need to do that anymore. Actually, we want these cultural venues that we're normally excluded from, these big, expensive cultural venues that actually a lot of our communities also are part of. Often in their working, like in the bar, you can see black and brown people in the bar, for example, in a lot of these spaces, but not up on the stage unless they're doing music or something like that. So there's something about how can we be in these places and really feel that we have ownership of them,
Mm.
that we can be in there in a multitude of ways. That there isn't just one way in which we can be in there. That I could be in there and be moody and brash, or like or bubbly and silly, or whatever. There's lots of different ways in which I could be in a space. So that was using Brownton Abbey uses a kind of like Afro-futurist punky sort of aesthetic. And uses the club space, uses accessibility to make sure that a kind of intersectional approaches to accessibility as well. So the dance floor needs to be accessible to wheelchairs, as does all areas of the space, the backstage areas as well, so that our performers could, if we have any performers that are in wheelchairs, that's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that the toilets, for example, are gender neutral. And if a venue doesn't want to have a gender neutral toilet, then we're not going to do the work there, because then Brownton Abbey can't do what it is there to do.
And what sort of venues have you been to across the country? Did you say it was Brighton Festival that?
We
Yeah.
started in Broughton Dome, so that was a really quite an amazing thing for me as well, because before that I'd been someone just said it should be happening in the pavilion, and it definitely should happen in the pavilion. I've got my eye on the pavilion one day. I think there's that, yeah. I think they're still a little bit frightened of these kind of things. Although we have Marlborough Productions has done some events inside the museum actually. So
Okay.
So who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
They are connected to the museum and the pavilion, so maybe in the future.
Mm.
Um, was I just answering a question then? I forgot what I was
I was
answering.
just asking about other venues like across the country. Have you been to?
Yeah, so we started at Brighton Dome Concert Hall, which is an amazing place to start in. We had 700 people, and the amazing Big Frida performed in it. Big Frida had was later on, I think 6 months later, ended up doing something with Beyonce. A lot of people hadn't heard of Big Frida before, so that was really nice as well to be able to work with artists that, for some community members, artists that we like to put on our headline. I'd like to call it headline really, because I like to see all artists as being equal to each other. But the
Mhm.
kind of the big name artists. Or ones that maybe queer people of color might know really well intrinsically, but that a wider audience might not know, but are really delighted to experience. So there was something kind of also recognizing the kind of the cultural people on the outside of things. In a few years' time, we're in the middle of things. So there's something that I recognize the importance of the outsiders and what the kind of work that we see and what we see happening on the outside, how it will filter into the mainstream. So yeah, so we had Big Frida, an artist that the venue hadn't heard of before, and I think at the time they were like, okay, who's this person? Fine. And then later on, I'm obviously very happy about the cultural
Yeah,
association of having had Big Frida on their stage. Mickey Blanco is another artist that we've worked with who previously I think a lot of people hadn't heard of, but now is kind of tearing up all over the place. Maybe you haven't heard of Mickey Blanco yet, but you can check him
I
out.
haven't. I'm gonna.
Mykki Blanco, Blanco. They're doing some
This
amazing
is
work.
also what these talks are so good for, is that it just opens your eyes to other people. So yeah, thank you. We're looking those
These
up.
are both of them are musical artists who have a real like kind of energetic performance to their work as well, and a real kind of politic to it, and which fits in really well with the live art and performance art that sat around it as well.
Yeah. Can you, Tarik, can you tell us just, you've kind of touched on it a bit, but a bit about your creative process and how, you've got an amazing mind and ideas and you kind of visualize things, but what sort of process do you go through to get to the point of like Brownton Abbey, for example? How do you?
I think for me, there's maybe sometimes generating ideas, but it's when something happens that then creates a feeling here where I'm just like really excited or start to get obsessed with something, and I kind of can't put it down, and it just stuck in my mind so much so that I feel like it needs to exist in the world.
Yeah.
Like, so that happened with Brownton Abbey, and a few different things kind of came with Brownton. I was That was a development from a piece that I'd done at a festival, which I'd been taking people to festivals dressed as aliens for a number of years. And then one year it happened that the theme of that festival was celebrity. So I decided that our aliens would be alien gods and a kind of Scientology sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then it happened that also that year, my aliens that happened to be gods were also all people of color. And that then also made being an alien have a whole different meaning, and made me realize also why I'd been so attracted to be dressing as a weird alien for so long. Feeling like, oh, I kind of enjoy kind of being able to expand on the feeling of being weird or an other, and somehow and turn it into something that is empowered. And then adding a kind of god layer to that as well was kind of really quite ridiculous, but really beautiful actually, to have that energy of being like, hi, I'm the weirdest thing you've ever seen, but also get down and worship. It was just quite ridiculous but beautiful.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's been giving a theme that helps, that I can then fit something I've already got, and I can adapt it to fit in something else that can create an interesting energy. Sometimes things come from a name. Again, Brownton Abbey. There was a few different origins, but there was a point when I was talking about how I'd helped a brown friend, move to Brighton, and I was saying that I think it's actually quite a nice place for people of colour to live, despite the racism that happens here. In a kind of, people think they're not racist because they live in Brighton, which is really silly. Just because they live here, that they couldn't possibly be racist. Exactly, we love everybody. The thing I just said to you that was offensive wasn't offensive. So that stuff does happen, but also it's a really beautiful place to be, and it's peaceful, and there's nature, and it's quite a healing place to be, and there's just there's a lot of joy here, and people do quite like a little bit of unusualness. So it's not I was saying, so I helped a brown friend of mine move down here, and then I was saying that I'd love more black and brown people to move to Brighton and for it to be kind of known in the same way that Hebden Bridge is known for having a very large lesbian population. And I was thinking I'd love Brighton to be known as Brownton. And then a friend of mine was like Brownton Abbey. So that became the name of my home because I live in an area of Brighton. I've got a cheap flat in a nice part of Brighton. And so
Mm.
I feel kind of bougie. I've got a balcony, just feels quite weird.
Right.
So I kind of developed this idea of like Lord and Lady Brownton, and that then later on became, when I was coming up with this club idea, thought it needs a good name, and that Brownton Abbey would be a good way of kind of saying a lot of what it does in a way. It doesn't. Brownton Abbey, it gets people to laugh, which is I think a good thing to do. It's a bit of there's a joke in the title
Mm.
that suggests a power flip. And I think the joke also puts people at ease. But beyond that, I mean, I haven't even watched Downton Abbey, so I've got no. It's not like a parody of the show. Um,
No
um,
link, no link. What about your the kind of process of linking up with other people in the industry? How does that work for you? Are you like are you kind of set on networking, or is it just sort of built up naturally? What about any advice on kind of people you've met sort of 20 years ago that you're now working with? Because I know that can happen a lot in the industry, is that your connections you make are so important, and you might work with them in the future, or
yeah, it's surprising who kind of comes back like later on, or I guess a thing within the arts is for that reason actually, because so much stuff is like freelance or it's about the connections that you've made. It can be helpful to be the kind of person that is easy to get to work with or that is enjoyable to work with. Doesn't have to be easy actually, because sometimes not being easy can be part of the enjoyment. Actually, kind of challenging something, but also making space, making a good environment where challenges are safe, I guess,
yeah,
or being able
safety.
to being able to kind of safely challenge something, but also still keep people as part of that you are still community, I guess. The challenge isn't a threat. A non-threatening challenge is I guess what I'm saying can be important. But
Mm.
yeah, I guess that's I don't want to say too much about being likable, because I also recognize that might be like that can have its own problems. But I do think that there's something within industries about you can go a long way by um, being approachable, being just it's not really about being cutthroat, basically, which maybe it is in other industries. I
Yeah.
think this is an industry that is more successful by being community minded.
Mm. Yeah, and I think like what's really coming out from talking to you is kind of being true to yourself as well, and accepting that and being open about that and not worrying about who you are. Don't try and cover it up, because that can just make it harder and give you lots of stumbling blocks, I guess. So be open and be true to yourself.
Yeah, really, the more you can kind of get to know who you are, which can take a long time to do as well. And
Yeah.
also, I think to allow yourself to develop and change, to kind of not to think of yourself that you're kind of like this is the only way that you do things and that's a static, that there's development over time.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. And what about earning a living, Tarik, if you don't mind? Could you give us a little insight into are you freelance, are you employed, who pays you, who does your invoices, what's the deal there?
Currently, I am an employee of Marlborough Productions.
Okay.
So I get paid a salary, which is an amazing thing. I hadn't had a salary in my whole life until the last year, I think. Pretty much since lockdown. Maybe the year before that. The last couple of years, we've been able to kind of um, gather enough core funds to be able to rely on a salary. Previous to that, it was kind of a bit hand to mouth, I have to say. And
Mm.
so actually, I mean, I've always been someone who's bit thrifty. I can make something work, and have managed and have had to be a little bit having my own standards when it comes to money, I guess, or just basically living off not enough for a long time.
Mm.
And now though, having spent, and I also don't so I recognize that things change over time as well. Like what might have worked for me 10 years ago might not work for people now. Um, so I don't want to kind of suggest that because something worked for me that it would necessarily work for other people. But
Mm.
definitely for me, there was a kind of just living a little bit like I had another job on the side. I worked in a juice bar while I was also, but worked in the juice bar while I first started doing the Marlborough, the pub. Sorry, doing the theatre. I was doing the pub and the theatre at some point, and then I left the pub working, pulling pints because people were trying to ask me about booking the theatre while I was pulling drinks, and it meant that I couldn't pull drinks properly and I couldn't run the theatre properly, and that felt kind of like I'm not doing either jobs properly. So doing two things in one space was quite hard, but I did have a kind of a side job that helped get the other one started. And the side job one was one that didn't have too much responsibility. You know, I was working in a juice bar making juices, and I had nice colleagues, and I got to eat well, and we ate a lot of the profits. It was good times.
Yeah, you could leave it behind. You could leave work and just forget about that. And
yeah, having something that you don't have to be responsible for as well, I think can be helpful if you're doing things that are that you do have, if you've got other areas of your life where you do have a lot of responsibility, where you've got to lead something, for example. And then like now also I'm getting paid for speaking gigs. That seems to be happening quite a lot. Particularly since lockdown, since everything went onto Zoom, all of a sudden people keep hitting me up. I don't know if that will last until after lockdown. Hopefully people will still have an interest in things I have to say. And I also recognize that that's happened. It's hard to say for sure, but I do feel like the last year there's been a lot more consciousness around black and brown leadership, particularly. About racism in general, and that has also included leadership and diverse leadership. And so I think that's led to people going, oh, there's a guy who's leading stuff. And so people have been asking me to talk about things, which has been interesting to me because I guess I spent a long time feeling a little bit like a chancer and an imposter, that whole imposter syndrome thing, and just a bit, part of me has felt a bit like a fraud. Like, I don't know, I'm just some guy who just took hold of a theatre and just things got out of control. And here I am. So I think I felt like that for quite a long time, but still did it anyway. But it's been a really beautiful thing over time to recognize actually my unusual journey into what I've been doing is beneficial, not just for myself and the people that I work with, but also can act as a roadmap or maybe not just a roadmap, because I feel like I haven't been using a map myself. So it's a kind of testimony to you don't need a map to find your way through. The instinct can get the instinct and get creativity, teamwork, can get you through to somewhere quite interesting that you never would have imagined.
Yeah, that's you've put that beautifully. I think just that thing about there's not things aren't necessarily mapped out, and that's okay. It's okay and I really liked as well about what you said about thinking about the future too much. It's like you can then forget about what you're doing now creatively and the work you're doing now and the relationships you're building.
What I found on my journey, just to speak on that, if you don't mind me just jumping in there, is that quite a lot of times, so for example, with the Marlborough, with running the theatre, I worked in the pub for a number of years, and I remember there was a point when I kind of frivolously was like, maybe one day I'll run the theatre. And then I forgot. That was kind of like this vision, and then I forgot about it. And then 10 years later, I was running the theatre, and then there was only a few years into running the theatre that I remembered that I'd had a kind of frivolous idea, like maybe one day I'll do that. And that's happened at the time when I suggested that, when I dreamt those things up, I've not known how I would do it, and just thought that's a beautiful and silly idea. And then I've still believe that I don't know, part of me has still been open to that, but I haven't been trying to like make it happen. I've just kind of maybe just let the cells in my body orient myself in that way, so that when opportunities that might suggest that can happen, that those things that open up, I recognize that as being, that's maybe bringing me in that direction, so I can do that. But generally, I'm not making everything kind of trying to fit that. And that's happened with a few other things as well, like venues that I've just imagined, like maybe I could do something in there one day. Maybe I'll work with this artist one day, and then forgetting all about that, and then somehow 5 or 10 years later, I'm actually at the stage where that is possible, and it's happened without me even having forgotten that it was a dream, a pipe dream at some point, and then became a reality.
Yeah, so you're not really putting yourself under that pressure of going, right, I'm setting myself this goal. You've had an idea and you sort of park it and then go, oh yeah, I remember that a few years ago. I thought I want to do that, and now I'm doing it. That's a really nice way to look at it. we're running out of time, and I'm conscious I haven't opened. Well, I mean, I have. You've been welcome to feed in questions throughout, but if anyone has any questions for Tarik, then please do pop it in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I saw Alex had a hand raised at some point ages ago.
Oh, sorry, Alex.
No worries. It's more like a general question. It's more like your own point of view. But I feel like that some parts of people, when you're working on a project, on a movie, for example, I think that some specific people don't get the credits they should get. Like, you know, often people talk about that actors get the most credits, and the director and the writer, but I feel like people from the technical stuff, so like producers or even people who do the editing, all those technical stuffs, or cinematographers, I feel like they don't get that much attention. Do you feel that as well? And if yes, why do you think this might be?
Do I think that people behind the scenes get less attention? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's what I feel. But I might be wrong, but that's what I kind of get of, because I feel like the main people that we all talk about are more the people in front of the camera, for example, or the one who is doing the project, rather than those who do the technical part. That's what I feel. So
I think that's definitely true. I don't know if it means that they're more valued, but they might seem like they have more value, I guess, because they're the ones that people are telling the stories about. I also reckon I feel like a lot of the time it's not always the case, but I think a lot of the time people who are working behind the scenes are a little bit happier behind the scenes. I know that sometimes I'm personally happy to be in front of the stage sometimes, and sometimes I'm really happy to be not in the public eye and prefer to be like working on things in the background. And every now and again I'm like, hey, it was me. But yeah, I think that's the thing, I guess, and I do think, and I think that's a great thing if you're recognizing that as being important, then that's really, I think, you know, again, leaning into where your energy lies. If there's something that feels very true for you, to kind of examine that and think about why, and it might be that you're in a really great position to make sure that people behind the scenes are valued properly because of your own, I don't know, your own drive to make sure that that isn't happening, you know, so that is happening, that people are being, you know, that people are being valued, or that their stories are being told, or that their careers are recognized as being important or integral to the art that is being made. There's also the creative elements, I guess, is what people are doing behind the scenes as well. Like a lighting designer is a creative job, a sound technician is a creative job. And I think ones that can also be quite reliable. I know quite a lot of people who work on behind the scenes who have a bit more regular income, actually, because they can also jump into doing corporate work at times and suddenly make a few grand on a weekend or something, from lighting some terrible politician.
Yeah, that was a great question, Alex. Thank you. Elijah, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, for sure. Is my mic okay? I know that my phone's a bit whack.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Wicked. Tarik, yeah, thank you for your time. It's good to see you speaking to learn about the production. I guess I kind of just wanted, I think Afrofuturism is like such a wicked concept, but sometimes maybe, I don't know if this is a general thing, but sometimes to me like lacks like clarity on like what it is, because it can mean so a different thing to every I don't know, a practitioner of Afrofuturism, or you see kind of where I'm going for this. Like, what's your personal take on Afrofuturism? What does it mean to you? You know?
Yeah, I think it is. I was just reading about something the other day, actually, and it's very much, I think, you know, it's black and brown, it's black people living their lives, you know, actually, now and in the future, you know, that we exist in the future. One of my favorite, I've got this brilliant book called Black Futures. It came out, I think, last year, kind of like an anthology book. And there's an artist in it who's got this, who made a statement on a billboard that says, there are black people in the future. Just that, there are black people in the future. And for me, that was it's such an incredibly powerful statement. Like, we're often not seen in the future, and if we are seen in the future, it's not understood as how we got there in an empowered way. like in science fiction, for example, you might see a black commander of a starship, but no one's ever said like, wait, when did we defeat racism, and so that a black person could become a starship commander and that no one is questioning their authority. So there's this kind of, for me, it's actually, I guess the platform for me is one that I love because it allows for the complexity and the diversity of blackness, and not just in a kind of not just thinking about historically, but also envisioning new ways of being. A lot of the time, those new ways of beings are also based on old ways of being. Actually, there's a kind of circularness, I think, as well, that I like about Afrofuturism. And again, for me, that's why it's attractive. I think is because there's a kind of a speculative fiction, sci-fi element that, well, I've always liked a little bit of science fiction. There's that kind of one foot in reality, another one just outside of it, but also that science fiction can become reality. And yeah, I think it's just a possibility, the endless possibilities that I think that Afrofuturism presents to me. Is like a literal endless possibilities, and for communities that I think a lot of the time our existences can be expected to be small, actually really kind of blowing that idea up is, I think, really, really powerful. It's something that also I think what I like about Afrofuturism is that there's definitely like academic treatises written on it, but I also like that as an art form. It doesn't rely on the kind of academia or kind of like this is a crystallizedness about what it is in order for it to be in existence. I feel like, for example, other artistic movements or platforms thinking about something like live art, that relies heavily on academia for it to be understood. And there's something I think is really beautiful about with Afrofuturism, that the art can speak for itself, as it can do. So can academia written about it as well. But so that's my answer. I'm not sure if it was if it answered your question, but that's the answer I've got.
Nice. Thank you, Elijah, for that question. I think we're out of time, but I think we've got time for one more question, which is from Vanessa, who just asked, have you got any advice for performers in training?
Well, as someone who hasn't been a performer in training myself, I'm not sure what my advice would be, but let me think. I would say if you're a performer in training who also is a person who's marginalized, to make sure that there are other people who are like you, that you know other people who have similar marginalizations, because that will empower you. That's kind of advice from my perspective. I'm not sure if there's a more specific kind of advice that you're looking for, Vanessa, then feel free to ask it.
No, that's good. That's good. Do we have any more questions from anyone? Thank you, Tarik. You've been so open and honest and like about everything to do with yourself, and it's been an absolutely brilliant talk. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed chatting to you and listening to your what great work you do, and bring on that venue. We need another venue. Like,
we do need a venue. If we do get a venue, what I want it to be is it will have space for a black queer-led roller disco. That's all I want to exist. And performance can happen on it, obviously, as well. You can easily put a performance in a roller disco space, but I just have this vision of us all. It's obviously a space that I want for everybody, but it's black and queer-led. Partly because of the music. I've got some music that I really want to be playing, and the kind of the lighting scheme, and just that I just see us all moving together, and not being in a space where alcohol is I think alcohol wouldn't be allowed there. So that, I think, would be a really nice place to kind of feel joy in your body and have a kind of movement practice together.
Yeah,
that can be performative and doesn't have to be.
Well, knowing everything you've said tonight, that's going to happen. I'm sure
it is doing that kind of thing in me where I'm like, I'm obsessed.
In a few years' time, but it will be there, and we'll all be there. Elijah's just asked where people can connect with you. You want to?
I'll give you my email address. I mean, I am on social media stuff, but I don't really use it that often anymore. I find, oh, that's the wrong email address. I find that I get really anxious. Maybe it's because of having spent so much time. I used to have to use my Facebook wall to promote a lot of stuff, and that just the merging of kind of work and personal kind of came a little bit too connected, that I just always felt almost stressful posting things. So I'm just going to put my email address. If anybody, you can send me an email if you wanna. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, but I don't do much on there. But I might do at some point. But actually, Brownton Abbey's on Instagram, so you should check out that as well. Actually, so Carnival Catalyst is my personal Insta, and then the Instagram for Brownton Abbey is, I think, Brownton.Abbey.
Brilliant. And Tarik, you asked about the music at the start and who it was, and Mike's just asked, and it's an artist called Jay Felix, who's
Jay Felix.
Yeah, he's a local. Joe Newman is the artist, and yeah, that was his music. Check him out. He's great.
Cool. Is that on Spotify?
Yeah, you can find him on Spotify. He's done a lot of work with Quantic, and he's signed to True Thoughts record label, which is
cool.
So there you go. There's
Jay Felix.
Jay Felix, yeah.
Great.
And we'll when Rosie sends out the sort of email evaluation about this, we'll just pop in your I've lost it now. I've lost the flow. I'm thinking about roller discos. I can't talk anymore. You just and Vanessa said, thank you, Tarik. That was great. Crack on with the roller disco. Look, everyone, roller discos.
Yeah, mine are ready too. Yeah, okay. So we're going to be skating together. I look forward to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for your questions. Thanks, everyone. Take care.